those bikers, they think that they are so cool. But it's far from the truth. Hello mọi người. Mọi người thả tim giúp mình nha để mình bắt đầu livestream này. Hôm trước thì mình dừng lại ở cái chỗ này rồi đúng không? Trước thì vừa dừng xong ở cái phần lý do số 3, right? Đây, disconnection from meaningful values. So today we are going to look at the next cause of depression, which is disconnection from childhood trauma. Hello everyone. Hi. Well, I just got back from work, and now I am preparing to live stream. Hello everyone. Ok, bắt đầu nha. Cause for disconnection from childhood trauma. Đây là cái sự mất kết nối với những cái nỗi ám ảnh ở trong tuổi thơ mọi người. When the women first came into Dr. Vincent Veliti's office, some of them found it hard to fit through the door. These patients weren't just a bit overweight. They were eating so much that they were rendering themselves diabetic and destroying their own internal organs. They didn't seem to be able to stop themselves. They were assigned here to his clinic as their last chance. It was the mid-1980s, and in the California city of San Diego, Vincent had been commissioned by the not-for-profit medical provider Kaiser Permanente to look into the fastest growing driver of their cause, obesity. Nothing they were trying was working, so he was given a blank sheet of paper. Start from scratch, they said. Total blue sky thinking. Figure out what we can do to deal with this. And so the patients began to come. But what he was going to learn from them led, in fact, to a major breakthrough in a very different area, how we think about depression and anxiety. As he tried to scrape away all the assumptions that surround obesity, Vincent learned about a new diet plan based on a maddeningly simple thought. It asked, what if these severely overweight people simply stopped eating and lived off the fat stores they built up in their bodies until they were down to a normal weight? What would happen? In the news, curiously, there had recently been an experiment in which this was tried 8,000 miles away for somewhat strange reasons. For years in Northern Ireland, if you were put in jail for being part of the Irish Republican Army's violent campaign to drive the British out of Northern Ireland, you were classed as a political prisoner. That meant you were treated differently from people who committed, say, bank robberies. You were allowed to wear your own clothes, and you didn't have to perform the same work as other inmates. The British government decided to shut down that distinction, and they argued that the prisoners were simply common criminals and shouldn't get this different treatment anymore. So the prisoners decided to protest by going on a hunger strike. They began slowly to waste away. So the designers of this new diet proposal looked into the medical evidence about these Northern Ireland hunger strikers to find out what killed them. It turns out that the first problem they faced was a lack of potassium and magnesium. Without them, your heart stops beating properly. Okay, the radical dieters thought, what if you give people supplements of potassium and magnesium? Then that doesn't happen. If you have enough fat on you, you get a few more months to live until a protein deficiency kills you. Okay, what if you also give people the supplements that will prevent that? Then it turns out you get a year to live, provided there's enough fat. Then you'll die from a lack of vitamin C, scurvy, or other deficiencies. Okay, what if you give people supplements for that too? Then it looks as though you'll stay alive. Vincent discovered in the medical literature, and healthy, and you lose 300 pounds a year. Then you can start eating again at a healthy level. All this suggested that in theory, even the most obese person would be down to a normal weight within a manageable time. The patients coming to him had been through everything, every fat diet, every shaming, every prodding and pulling. Nothing had worked. They were ready to try anything. So, under careful monitoring and with lots of supervision, they began this program. As the months passed, Vincent noticed something. It worked. The patients were shedding weight. They were not getting sick. In fact, they were returning to health. People who had been rendered disabled by constant eating started to see their bodies transform in front of them. Okay. Their friends and relatives applauded. People who knew them were amazed. Vincent believed he might have found the solution to extreme overweight. I thought, my God, we've got this problem licked, he said, and then something happened that Vincent never expected. Thank you so much. Make sure to send me hearts if you are enjoying my live stream and follow me if you haven't. Okay, nhớ follow mình và thả tim giúp mình nha. Thank you. In the program, there were some stars, people who shed remarkable amounts of weight remarkably quickly. The medical team and all their friends expected these people who had been restored to health to react with joy, except they didn't react that way. The people who did best and lost the most weight were often thrown into a brutal depression or panic or rage. Some of them became suicidal. Without their bulk, they felt they couldn't cope. They felt unbelievably vulnerable. They often fled the program, gorged on fast food, and put their weight back on very fast. Okay, Vincent was baffled. They were fleeing from a healthy body they now knew they could achieve toward an unhealthy body they knew would kill them. Why? He didn't want to be an arrogant, moralistic doctor standing over his patients, wagging his finger and telling them they were ruining their lives. That's not his character. He genuinely wanted to help them save themselves, so he felt desperate. That's why he did something no scientist in this field had done with really obese people before. He stopped telling them what to do and started listening to them instead. He called in the people who had panicked when they started to shed the pounds and asked them, "What happened when you lost weight? How did you feel?" There was one 28-year-old woman who I called Susan to protect her medical confidentiality. In 51 weeks, Vincent had taken Susan down from 408 pounds to 132 pounds. It looked like he had saved her life. Then, quite suddenly, for no reason anyone could see, she put on 37 pounds in the space of 3 weeks. Before long, she was back above 400 pounds. So Vincent asked her gently what had changed when she started to lose weight. It seemed mysterious to both of them. They talked for a long time. There was, she said eventually, one thing. When she was very obese, men never hit on her. But when she got down to a healthy weight, one day she was propositioned by a man, a colleague, who she happened to know was married. She fled and right away began to eat compulsively, and she couldn't stop. Okay, so this part right here, it has some important points. So the reason why this woman right here gained back her weight was because she was hit on by men. Like, here it said that she was propositioned by a man. Proposition là kiểu sao nhỉ? Kiểu gã mọi người, kiểu sao? Yeah, kiểu nói chuyện và tương tác với người khác bằng một cách kiểu rất là sexually disrespectful, kiểu rất là disrespectful ấy. This was when Vincent thought to ask a question he hadn't asked his patients before. When did you start to put on weight? If it was, say, when you were 13, or when you went to college, why then, and not a year before, or a year after? Susan thought about the question. She had started to put on weight when she was 11 years old, she said. So he asked, was there anything else that happened in your life when you were 11? Well, Susan replied, that was when my grandfather began to rape me. Vincent began to ask all his patients these 3 simple questions. How did you feel when you lost weight? When in your life did you start to put on weight? What else happened around that time? As he spoke to the 183 people on the program, he started to notice some patterns. One woman started to rapidly put on weight when she was 23. What happened then? She was raped. She looked at the ground after she confessed this and said softly, "Overweight is overlooked. And that's the way I need to be." I was incredulous, he told me, when I sat with him in San Diego. It seemed every other person I was asking was acknowledging such a history. I kept thinking, it can't be. People would know. If this was true, somebody would have told me. Isn't that what medical school is for? When 5 of his colleagues came in to conduct further interviews, it turned out some 55% of the patients in the program had been sexually abused, far more than people in the wider population. And even more, including most of the men, had had severely traumatic childhoods. Many of these women had been making themselves obese for an unconscious reason, to protect themselves from the attention of men, who they believed would hurt them. Being very fat stops most men from looking at you that way. It works. It was when he was listening to another grueling account of sexual abuse that it hit Vincent. He told me later, what we had perceived as a problem, major obesity, was in fact very frequently the solution to problems that the rest of us knew nothing about. These 2 paragraphs, the ideas that they contain are so important, and all the underlying parts right here, maybe you should remember them because they are the main points of the chapter. Vincent began to wonder if the anti-obesity programs, including his own, had been doing it all wrong. By, for example, giving out nutritional advice, obese people didn't need to be told what to eat. They knew the nutritional advice better than he did. They needed someone to understand why they ate. After meeting a person who had been raped, he told me, I thought with a tremendously clear insight that sending these women to see a dietitian to learn how to eat right would be grotesque. Far from teaching the obese people. Các bạn ơi, các bạn nhớ thả tim cho mình nha. Cảm ơn mọi người rất là nhiều. Thank you. If you have any questions, just leave it in the comment section, okay? And I will go through the questions again soon. Các bạn có câu hỏi gì cứ viết vào comment nha. Far from teaching the obese people, he realized they were the person who could teach him what was really going on. So he gathered the patients in groups of around 15 and asked them, why do you think people get fat? Not how. How is obvious. I'm asking why. What are the benefits? Encouraged to think about it for the first time, they told him. The answers came in 3 different categories. The first was that it is sexually protective. Men are less interested in you, so you are safer. The second was that it is physically protective. For example, in the program, there were 2 prison guards who lost between 100 and 150 pounds each. Suddenly, as they shed their bulk, they felt much more vulnerable among the prisoners. They could be more easily beaten up. To walk through those cell blocks with confidence, they explained, they needed to be the size of a refrigerator. And the third category was that it reduced people's expectations of them. You apply for a job weighing 400 pounds, people assume you're stupid, lazy. Vincent said, if you've been badly hurt by the world, and sexual abuse is not the only way this can happen, you often want to retreat. Put on a lot of weight is, paradoxically, a way of becoming invisible to a lot of humanity. When you look at a house burning down, the most obvious manifestation is a huge smoke billowing out, he told me. It would be easy then to think that the smoke is the problem, and if you deal with the smoke, you've solved it. But thank God that fire departments understand that the piece that you treat is the piece you don't see, the flames inside, not the smoke billowing out. Otherwise, house fires would be treated by bringing big fans to blow the smoke away, and that would make the house burn down faster. obesity, he realized, isn't the fire, it's the smoke. Okay, I'm reading this book. It's called Lost Connections, and it's written by Johan Hari, for those of you who are wondering. Mình đọc theo đoạn nữa xong rồi mình sẽ nghỉ nha. Ý là mình sẽ take a break. One day, Vincent went to a medical conference dedicated to obesity to present his findings. After he had spoken, a doctor stood up in the audience and explained, "People who are more familiar with these matters recognize that these statements by patients describing their sexual abuse are basically fabrications to provide a cover for their failed lives." It turned out people treating obesity had noticed before that a disproportionate number of obese people described being abused. They just assumed that they were making excuses. Vincent was horrified. He had in fact verified the abuse claims of many of his patients by talking to their relatives or to law enforcement officers who had investigated them, but he knew he didn't have hard scientific proof yet to rebut people like this. His impressions from talking to individual patients, even gathering the figures from within his group, didn't prove much. He wanted to gather proper scientific data, so he teamed up with a scientist named Dr. Robert Ander, who had specialized for years in the study of why people do self-destructive things like smoking. Together, funded by the Centers for Disease Control, a major U.S. agency funding medical research, they drew up a way of testing all this to see if it was true beyond the small sample of people in Vincent's program. They called it the Adverse Childhood Experiences ACE study, and it's quite simple. It's a questionnaire. You are asked about 10 different categories of terrible things that can happen to you when you are a kid, from being sexually abused to being emotionally abused to being neglected. And then there's a detailed medical questionnaire to test for all sorts of things that could be going wrong with you, like obesity or addiction. One of the things that they added to the list, almost as an afterthought, was the question, "Are you suffering from depression?" This survey was then given to 17,000 people who were seeking health care for a whole range of reasons, from Kaiser Permanente in San Diego. The people who filled in the form were somewhat healthier and a little older than the general population, but otherwise fairly representative of the city's population. When the results came in, they added them up at first to see if there were any correlations. It turns out that for every category of traumatic experience you went through as a kid, you were radically more likely to become depressed as an adult. If you had 6 categories of traumatic events in your childhood, you were 5 times more likely to become depressed as an adult than somebody who didn't have any. If you had 7 categories of traumatic event as a child, you were 3,100% more likely to attempt to commit suicide as an adult. When the results came out, I was in a state of disbelief, Dr. Ander told me. I looked at it and I said, "Really? This can't be true. You just don't get figures like this in medicine very often." Crucially, they hadn't just stumbled on proof that there is a correlation, that these two things happen at the same time. They seem to have found evidence that these traumas have caused these problems. How do we know? The greater the trauma, the greater your risk of depression, anxiety, or suicide. The technical term for this is dose-response effect. The more cigarettes you smoke, the more your risk of lung cancer goes up. That's one reason we know smoking causes cancer. In the same way, the more you were traumatized as a child, the more your risk of depression rises. Curiously, it turns out emotional abuse was more likely to cause depression than any other kind of trauma, even sexual molestation. Being treated cruelly by your parents was the biggest driver of depression out of all these categories. When they showed the results to other scientists, including the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, who co-funded the research, they too were incredulous. The study shocked people, Dr. Anna told me. People didn't want to believe it. People at the CDC didn't want to believe it. There was resistance within the CDC when I brought the data around, and the medical journals initially didn't want to believe it because it was so astonishing that they had to doubt it, because it made them challenge the way they thought about childhood. It challenged so many things all at one time. In the years that followed, the study has been replicated many times, and it always finds similar results. But we have barely begun, Vincent told me, to think through its implications. Okay, right. I think I'm gonna take a short break now. And I'm going to look at your comments, okay? If you have any comments, you can write it down in the comment section. Astonishing. Yeah, maybe. Không phải là từ nào mình cũng phát âm đúng đâu. Chọn âm thì có thể đôi khi sai. Mình không có link mua sách bạn ạ. Tại vì là sách này mình mua sách cũ. Begun. How do you practice speaking? I practice every day. I read books like this, and I listen to a lot of English, and then I speak to myself. Mình livestream tầm khoảng 10 giờ nhé bạn. Ok, bạn nào chưa follow mình thì nhớ follow mình nhá. Make sure to follow me if you haven't. Okay. So Vincent, as he absorbed all this, came to believe that we have been making the same mistakes with depression that he had been making before with obesity. We have failed to see it as a symptom of something deeper that needs to be dealt with. There's a house fire inside many of us, Vincent had come to believe, and we've been concentrating on the smoke. Many scientists and psychologists had been presenting depression as an irrational malfunction in your brain or in your genes, but he learned that Ellen Barber, an internist at Stanford University, has said that depression isn't a disease. Depression is a normal response to abnormal life experiences. I think that's a very important idea, Vincent told me. It takes you beyond the comforting, limited idea that the reason I'm depressed is I have a serotonin imbalance or dopamine imbalance or what have you. It is true that something is happening in your brain when you become depressed, he says, but that is not a causal explanation. It is a necessary intermediary mechanism. Some people don't want to see this because, at least at first, it's more comforting, Vincent said. To think it's all happening simply because of changes in the brain. It takes away an experiential process and substitutes a mechanistic process. It turns your pain into a trick of the light that can be banished with drugs, but they don't ultimately solve the problem, he says, any more than just getting the obese patients to stop eating solved their problems. Medications have a role, he told me. Are they the ultimate and all? No. Do they sometimes shortchange people? Absolutely. To solve the problem for his obese patients, Vincent said, they had all realized together that they had to solve the problems that were leading them to eat obsessively in the first place. So he set up support groups where they could discuss the real the real reasons why they ate and talk about what they had been through. Once that was in place, far more people became able to keep going through the fasting program and stay at the safe weight. He was going to start exploring a way to do this with depression with startling results, as I'll discuss later. More than anyone else I spoke to about the hidden causes of depression, Vincent made me angry. After I met with him, I went to the beach in San Diego and raged against what he had said. I was looking hard for reasons to dismiss it. Then I asked myself, why are you so angry about this? It seemed peculiar, and I didn't really understand it. Then, as I discussed it with some people I trust, I began to understand. If you believe that your depression is due solely to a broken brain, you don't have to think about your life or about what anyone might have done to you. The belief it all comes down to biology protects you in a way for a while. If you absorb this different story, though, you have to think about those things, and that hurts. I asked Vincent why he thinks traumatic childhoods so often produce depressed and anxious adults, and he said that he honestly doesn't know. He's a good scientist. He didn't want to speculate, but I think I might know, although it goes beyond anything I can prove scientifically. When you are a child and you experience something really traumatic, you almost always think it is your fault. There's a reason for this, and it's not irrational, like obesity. It is, in fact, a solution to a problem most people can't see. When I was young, my mother was ill a lot, and my father was mostly gone, usually in a different country. In the chaos of that, I experienced some extreme acts of violence from an adult in my life. For example, I was strangled with an electrical cord on one occasion. By the time I was 16, I left to go and live in another city, away from any adults I knew. And when I was there, I found myself, like many people who have been treated this way at a formative age, seeking out dangerous situations where I was again treated in ways I should not have been treated. Even now, as a 37-year-old adult, I feel like writing this down and saying it to you is an act of betrayal of the adults who carried out these acts of violence and the other adults who behaved in ways they shouldn't have. I know you can't figure out who these people are from what I've written. I know that if I saw an adult strangling a child with an electrical cord, it would not even occur to me to blame the child, and that if I heard someone try to suggest such a thing, I would assume they were insane. I know rationally where the real betrayal lies in this situation, but still, I feel it. It's there, and that feeling almost stopped me from saying this. Why do so many people who experience violence in childhood feel the same way? Why does it lead many of them to self-destructive behavior like obesity or hardcore addiction or suicide? I have spent a lot of time thinking about this. When you are a child, you have very little power to change your environment. You can't move away or force somebody to stop hurting you. So you have two choices. You can admit to yourself that you are powerless, that at any moment you could be badly hurt, and there's simply nothing you can do about it. Or you can tell yourself it's your fault. If you do that, you can actually gain some power, at least in your own mind. If it's your fault, then there's something you can do that might make it different. You aren't a pinball being smacked around a pinball machine. You are the person controlling the machine. You have your hands on the dangerous levels. In this way, just like obesity protected those women from the men they feared would rape them, blaming yourself for your childhood traumas protects you from seeing how vulnerable you were and are. You can become the powerful one. If it's your fault, it's under your control. But that comes at a cost. If you were responsible for being hurt, then at some level, you have to think you deserved it. A person who thinks they deserve to be injured as a child isn't going to think they deserve much as an adult either. This is no way to live, but it's a misfiring of the thing that made it possible for you to survive at an earlier point in your life. You might have noticed that this cause of depression and anxiety is a little different from the ones I have discussed up to now, and is different from the ones I'm going to discuss next. As I mentioned before, most people who have studied the scientific evidence accept that there are three different kinds of causes of depression and anxiety: biological, psychological, and social. The causes I've discussed up to now, and will come back to in a moment, are environmental. I'll come to biological factors soon. But childhood trauma belongs in a different category. It's a psychological cause. By discussing it here, I'm hoping childhood trauma can indicate to what the many other psychological causes of depression that are too specific to be discussed in a big, broad way. The ways our psyches can be damaged are almost infinite. I know somebody whose wife cheated on him for years with his best friend and who became deeply depressed when he found out. I know somebody who survived a terror attack that was almost constantly anxious for a decade after. I know someone whose mother was perfectly competent and never cruel to her, but was relentlessly negative and taught her always to see the worst in people and to keep them at a distance. You can't squeeze these experiences into neat categories. It wouldn't make sense to list adultery, terror attacks, or cold parents as causes of depression and anxiety. But here's what we know. Psychological damage doesn't have to be as extreme as childhood violence to affect you profoundly. Your wife cheating on you with your best friend isn't a malfunction in your brain, but it is a cause of deep psychological distress, and it can cause depression and anxiety. If you are ever told a story about these problems that doesn't talk about your personal psychology, don't take it seriously. Okay, right. Let's see how many. Oh, we are going to finish this chapter very soon. Dr. Anna, one of the pioneers of this research, told me it had forced him to turn his thinking about depression and other problems inside out. When people have these kind of problems, it's time to stop asking what's wrong with them, he said, and time to start asking what happened to them. Okay, right, so that is this chapter right here. Mình sẽ đọc tiếp một chương nữa nha mọi người. Okay, so I'm going to read one more chapter. And for those of you who are watching here, if you haven't followed me, make sure to do that now because I'm going to start another live stream. Okay, mình sẽ bật live stream khác nha mọi người. Mình sẽ bật một live stream khác trong vài phút nữa. Tại vì cái live stream này hơi bị doom một xíu nên là mình sẽ bật live stream khác nha. Và đọc chương tiếp theo nha. Các bạn nào chưa follow mình thì nhớ follow nhé. Would you give me some advices for some pieces of advice for concentrate for learning English? Well, actually I just read a book about how to maintain your focus. I would say that when you are trying to learn anything, shut yourself from all digital devices like your phones or your laptop and just focus on the act of studying. And then you can, focus for a short period of time, like 20 minutes, and then you take a 5-minute break, and then you can, again, study for 20 minutes, being super focused on your studying, and then, again, take a break. And you repeat the same thing. Ok mọi người ơi, mình sẽ bật lại một cái livestream khác nha. Các bạn nhớ follow mình luôn bây giờ nhé. Để mình tắt livestream này và mình sẽ bật một livestream khác để mình đọc tiếp cái chương tiếp theo. Disconnection from status and respect. You're welcome. Ok. Rồi, mình tắt nha mọi người ơi. Xong rồi mình sẽ bật lại livestream khác nha. I'm going to end this livestream and I'm going to start another livestream and read the next chapter, chapter 7. So follow me if you haven't, and I'm going to start a new one right now.